April the 19th, 2026. Guys, we've got two ceasefires that are about to kind of come to an end, or the deadline be up. The current 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon is scheduled to end on April the 26th. The separate 2-week ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran is currently set to expire on April the 22nd. So we're out a couple of days on that one and a week out on the 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. And guys, it's basically a ceasefire between Israel and Iran because it's Iranian proxies. But there's a problem, and we talked about this at the beginning of this, I think 51 days now of this war, that there's a biblical side talking about GOG and Magog and other things, and the physical aspects of it too. We've discussed high oil prices, food shortages, famine possibly, and we're going to kind of do both in this video. I'm going to try to get it into one session. We'll see. I've got a lot of information to share, and I think it's very pertinent to our situation. Again, the Israeli and Lebanon situation could be more critical in many ways than the peace deal that's ending on the 22nd between the U.S. and Iran. Now, or if something happens on April 22nd and we don't come to a deal with Iran and the conflict starts, we've heard Trump and Hegseth both say that they're prepared to take out the bridges and the infrastructures inside of Iran. That's what they're talking about the main attack points are. And so that could trigger an end to the 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. It may not make it to the 26th. And guys, you got a couple of different brokers playing here. First of all, Lebanon's big brother's Turkey, and that is GOG. Rosh was never Russia. It was simply that it sounded like it. And so instead of being technically correct, they were trying to be grammatically correct, or whatever you want to call it. But Rosh is in Turkey, and so are the other people mentioned in that area. They're part of the Turkish Empire and still are. Now, Turkey is very upset with Israel. They have condemned the killing of the civilians, over 3,000, and things like that, guys. A lot of bombing. We've seen it over the last few weeks, or excuse me, the last several weeks. Well, during this, so far, the peace treaty has held. Now, it may hold to the 26th. It may end on the 22nd if Iran and the U.S. tie back up. We're hoping that calmer heads will prevail on both sides. But right now, there's a big problem between Turkey and Israel over the bombing of civilians in Lebanon. Turkey, before this happened, had already stepped in and said they're basically the protector of Lebanon, and they will not allow it to become another Gaza. That's what they're saying. And so what we're setting up here is Turkey has a very fine army, and they have friends in the area. And I think the only reason that they have stayed out of the military side of the conflict is the fact that Israel knew they had the umbrella of the U.S. military hovering over that entire area. So they were emboldened a couple of different times because of that factor. So we're looking at a situation of where if the Iranian ceasefire holds, we would probably see eventually more and more troops move out of that area. And that would diminish that umbrella somewhat. But Turkey's going to make a move because they have already canceled all flights and shipments to Israel. No trade like that, no landing or anything from what I understand. And they've condemned them, and they put out an arrest warrant now for Netanyahu and maybe about 20 of his cohorts. So things are not going good in that arena. Again, Turkey is saying they will not allow Lebanon to become another Gaza. They're saying that it's all a land grab. It has been since 1947. You saw a map probably about the time this conflict started where I was showing the expansion of the land of Israel, or Jerusalem, outward, south, east, and north. Now they're trying to take Lebanon from the river southward. A couple of million people involved there, and including the Isle of Tyre. Anyway, Turkey has, I'm not sure how close their ties are with Hezbollah, that is the Iranian elite forces that are in Lebanon. I don't know how he's tied in with that, but he has promised protection over the Lebanese people and wants to stay in a good trade zone, but he's ending the talks and negotiations with Israel. That's not a good sign, because Turkey is so big, so powerful, has so many friends, that Israel wouldn't make it long. They would be beaten back pretty quickly. And of course, if it's a Gog-Magog situation, they will be driven back very hard. And then it says the Lord will step in like a lion roaring, and you'll see the top of Mount Carmel wither. And that will save the remnant. Now, who that remnant is, we will see, because we know that we have war hawks in every nation. Many of them, I believe, are from the synagogue of Satan. They claim to be one thing but are not. You've heard that before, right? Well, now, getting back to the report, the ceasefire announced by Donald Trump on Thursday, April 16th. It began at that evening, but now we've seen yesterday a couple ships get fired on by Iranian gunboats after Iran announced it was open. And there was one radio transmission that was recorded and it was put on YouTube from between the captain of one of the vessels that were being attacked, saying, "You guys just," I don't know what, I didn't watch the video, I read the caption. He was saying, "You guys just told me I could come through the pass and now you're shooting at me." And so the conflict is almost, we have players on both sides that want to see peace. We have players on both sides that want to see the current war. And it's not all political. Some of it's economic. A lot of it is spiritual. And it's a very dark spiritual system that's being put in place right now. I'm going to kind of move through this, but I mentioned the economic impacts, and you've got them on both sides, Iran and the U.S., and really the world when you close the straits. But the U.S. naval blockade is designed to make continued resistance economically impossible for Tehran. It's a siege. Daily revenue loss, they're estimating at $435 to $500 million per day by halting the exports of the oils, the petrochemicals, and minerals. The Iranian rial, their coin, is in a terminal collapse, and inflation for food items has reportedly surged past 100%. Because Iran's oil storage is nearly full, guys, it's estimated that they have a 13-day capacity. It may soon be forced to shut down the wells. Now, when that happens, guys, in other words, they're going to stop drilling and pumping because they have nowhere to put it. When you stop the wells, you don't just push a button and restart them, guys. It can shut them down and ruin them. And it can cause what they call permanent reservoir damage. Now, again, $500 million a day, and the U.S. is spending probably more than that because of the large amount of people that we have there. But the difference is we have a way to replace it thanks to you and me and the other taxpayer slaves, but Iran does not, as far as we know, not like they were getting with this $500 million a day loss. That adds up quickly. And they got 14 days of storage left. And if they shut down the storage, if it isn't pumped out of there, then it's going to take Iran much, much longer to reestablish its petroleum industry. And the economic report from the U.S. says the waiting it out strategy carries its own high cost for the U.S. taxpayer and consumer. Direct military costs, they're estimating the daily cost to run the war is ranging from $891 million to over $1 billion per day. We're talking about twice as much as Iran. Total expenditures since late February already exceed $35 billion. Gas prices in the U.S. have risen 5 to 10 cents daily, recently hitting an average of $4 per gallon. And analysts warn that a total breakdown in talks could push oil to $200 per barrel. And so the conflict, guys, is on edge all the way around the area, from Turkey to Iran, from Israel, all the way through. Now, the closure of the strait has, again, disrupted 20% of global oil, 30% of global urea, which is fertilizer, leading to fears of long-term food price hikes. And that's one of the four horsemen. Now, this $200 per barrel price, we talked about it many times as the war was raging, and we're starting to see it getting down to the low 90s and 80s now per barrel. But we don't know how that will continue. If, again, Iran is in kind of in a bind, and Trump knows it, if he can keep them from pumping oil for another 14 days where they have to shut down their wells, that's a double chess move. I'm just talking economically, because then they're in big trouble. Then if they get a break, in other words, after 14 days, if the peace treaty holds and Iran cannot come out into the open straits and send their ships and block everybody else, if that happens, they'll be okay. But I don't think that will, because of the way they're acting, and the U.S. is still set up as that blockade. And two ships tried to run it yesterday. Both were turned back by gunboats. But after being told by Iran it was okay to do it, things are changing that quickly. So what will happen is, if you get the peace treaty, or if it holds the status quo right now with the straits basically closed for 14 days, they'll shut down their rigs. Then if it opens, and after that, or within weeks, the rigs and the pumps could already be permanently damaged. So they would have 14 days of oil to sell, possibly, but damaged infrastructure. Now let's go back to Turkey, who I say is GOG for a moment. It says relationships between Israel and Turkey have collapsed to an unprecedented low, with Turkish officials recently warning that Israel views Turkey as its next enemy. There are reports out about that. And as of today, April 19th, the primary problem between the two nations include expansionism allegations. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan recently accused the Netanyahu government of using security as a pretext to seize more land in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, and Syria. President Erdogan has hinted at potential military intervention against Israel. There's the movement of GOG, comparing a potential move to Turkey's past actions in Libya and Nagorno-Karabakh. I think that's also in the Northern Africa section. But they went in and both manipulated politically and militarily Libya and got that situation straightened out. And that's what they're talking about. Come in with force and move it to peace. Peace. Turkey has issued arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu and 36 other Israeli officials now, accusing them of genocide and crimes against humanity. And when it looked like indiscriminate bombing going on in Lebanon, where entire blocks of cities were taken out. A lot of it looked like high-rise apartments and things like that. Now, Turkey began cutting ties, guys, back in 2024 because of what was happening between Israel and Gaza. Now, in November 2024, Erdogan announced he was going to cut ties, and Israel recently signaled a major escalation by moving to close its embassy and consulates in Turkey. Turkey has suspended all direct trade now with Israel and banned its carriers from flying to the country. The conflict is straining budgets for both regional powers, and that is where you can get a conflict going. In Israel, the country has approved a record defense budget for 2026 as it fights on multiple fronts. I think Trump is asking for $200 billion. Growth has stalled, and experts warn of potential tax hikes and cuts to social programs to fund the estimated $1 billion daily war cost, or $1 billion daily war cost. Turkey's threatening military action. Turkey faces its own economic problems, including high inflation, which analysts say may keep its military. Threats restricted to rhetoric for now. In other words, they're hoping that they can, because of the economics involved, handle this diplomatically. Now, we have other diplomats, unelected, especially one of them, that is trying to bring the Great Peace Deal in. Many of you know who I'm talking about. And, he works out of the White House, but he's not elected, and he's working as more or less a humanitarian side of this deal. But he has more power than any of the other players on the chessboard right now. And that kind of fits the narrative of what we could see when the world wakes up and says, is this the man? Now, think about it. Unelected billionaire is a billionaire because of trades with Saudi and other people in the Middle East. So there's a lot of economic reasons for this. But when you have a situation like we're seeing, the peace brokers are not who they say they are. They are more than likely in the synagogue or the leader of that synagogue. And you know the one I'm talking about in Revelation. Anyway, so we've got a couple of them, but one extremely powerful, a Jewish man, and leading in the shadows. We don't see him making announcements. He cannot be called up before Congress or anyone like that because he's not a politician. He's not involved with any cash flow or anything like that. But he's the one that is handling the world peace. And we know that could be very fragile once it's done. And if that is done, even though it's temporary, there will be a great outcry that this person has brought peace to the world. Then we're going to see something happen like someone stand up and claim to be God, and all hell's going to break loose. But anyway, that's what's being set up right now. Now, again, with the ceasefire set to expire April 22nd, that's the U.S.-Iran one, analysts at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs warn that Erdogan is positioning Turkey to fill the leadership vacuum left by Iran, aiming to become the primary defender of the Sunni Muslim world. Are you listening now? The Jerusalem Post has problems just like some of our news outlets here. But again, we're looking at the situation. I'm trying to look at it from outside of the U.S., but this is important because, again, Turkey is huge compared to some of these other states, and they have a border with Iran. All they would have to do is drop troops into the northern area. Then that would turn the conflict into a situation between, more than likely, if the U.S. intervenes, we would enter the war full-fledged at that point against someone that has not been bombed out of existence yet. So we got, again, I said that the April 22nd deadline may also be what's supposed to be the 26th deadline, simply because Iran refuses to open the straits. I'm not sure what some of the other details are, but again, we've got now the man and a couple other people, and Trump may be going back now in a couple of days for this second round of the Islamabad Accord. You know, we've already had the Abrahamic Accord signed, and who was that by? The man. The man that's not a politician, that's a world leader, maybe one of the top behind the scenes at the moment. Now, if that were to happen, and Turkey were to come into the northern border of Iran, then they would be surrounding Israel at that point. And they would also be probably joined by what's left of the Iranian Guard. And so you'd have the umbrella now of Turkey over the Middle East, and it would be overlapping the umbrella of the U.S. Now, one thing that might happen, I don't want to take it off the table completely, is this peace deal starts to work out a little bit. Peace, 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 remember? And we see U.S. troops brought home, and the pressure taken off the situation some. Then that would embolden Turkey. It would make Israel a little more hesitant to attack everybody since their umbrella is not in the area. So what I'm saying is Trump could move back, Erdogan could move in. Either way, Israel's going to be in trouble. The worst thing they could do at this point is to put one more bomb into Lebanon. You know, they're still, Turkey's saying they're still bulldozing, down residential homes and whole communities south of that Latana River. A lot of land again. And looking at what the world military analysts are saying as of today, and regional reports suggest that Turkey's first move in a confrontation with Israel would likely focus on an asymmetric warfare platform and regional position rather than a direct head-on military invasion. That's kind of how they handled Libya. And they could go in, kind of declare themselves both the temporary protectors and the governors of Iran. They would then have access to Iranian oil and just grow more powerful. If then Trump doesn't like Europe to start with, I don't know how his relationship with is with some of the other people, but that could bring peace to that area temporarily. I doubt it's going to last long because that is not the designs of the Luciferian doctrine. And that its design is to turn light to dark, dark to light. The exact opposite of what you think. And that's where the confusion comes in. And that's why they say in the Albert Pike World War III letter that everyone they will have lost their spiritual compass. And amidst, now this is not verbatim, but amidst all this chaos, they will turn to whatever they can find because they are disillusioned with what they've been told this whole time. And looking for a savior, they will turn to the Luciferian doctrine. Now you see why that man is there? I hope you understand. And the first thing I think I said about any of this was Trump's first 4 years, day one. I said, that's the man. Now, Turkey's looking at what they call the Syrian overland bridge. That is a strategic advantage for them when they move towards Israel. It says its influence over the new regime in Damascus. It has analysts suggesting that Turkey's first major military move would be establishing an overland bridge through Syria to place Turkish forces directly on Israel's northern doorstep. By leveraging its proxy control in Syria, Turkey can bypass the need for a naval invasion and station advanced radar or missile systems such as the ones recently placed at Damascus airport and to monitor and disrupt Israeli air operations. Erdogan has explicitly warned back on April the 12th that Turkey would deploy forces to Lebanon if Israel attempts a full-scale invasion of that country. This move would likely involve several things. And remember, Turkey likes to move in both militarily and kind of taking over at the same time without the destruction, using two types of force. Peace can be used as a force. But anyway, advisory and special forces are sending military advisors to assist Hezbollah or the Lebanese army, either one. Air defense support they're providing medium and long-range missile capabilities as a deterrent. So during this peacetime, we see Turkey stepping in and propping up some defenses getting ready. Do you realize how close we are, guys? They're calling it a soft blockade, and they're having ports shut down. In the immediate term, Turkey is already executing economic moves that mirror a military opening. And guys, Turkish port authorities are now requiring shipping agents to provide informal letters of assurance, stating that vessels are not connected to Israel and carry no military cargo for Israeli use. Turkey has already completely severed all economic and trade relations, which effectively acts as a preliminary soft blockade. And they're forming what they call a Sunni bloc. And again, they want to be the leader of the Sunni Muslim world. Diplomatically, Turkey's first move is to consolidate a quadrilateral alliance with Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Pakistan. By leading this bloc, Turkey aims to fill the power vacuum left by Iran and present itself as the sole defender of Islamic interests against Israeli expansionism. And some of the Israeli strategists, they have an opinion, and they're saying, from their perspective, Turkey's shift toward open hostility has made a preemptive strike a topic of serious discussion among defense experts. And that is when Turkey, a few days ago, said, their foreign minister said, that Israel has targeted them as the next Iran or the next battlefield. Since they've almost won that war, they want to keep going. But military strategists have outlined plans for a preemptive attack on Turkish F-16 bases, such as Ursulik and Izmir, and drone manufacturing plants like Baykar, which produce the TB-2 and the Inkinci drones that could overwhelm Israeli defenses. Counter-coalition to stop Erdogan's ambitions and unspoken alliance is forming between Israel, Greece, Cyprus, Egypt, and the UAE to act as a balancing force against Turkish naval and territorial claims. Guys, Israel is, it looks like they're going to be depending on a lot of people that I wouldn't turn my back on when it comes to who's going to side with the Sunni Muslims. That's on them. If they want to do it, go ahead. And some are suggesting that an Israeli preemptive strike or provocation could be the hook in the jaw mentioned in Ezekiel that finally pulls the Turkish-led coalition into a direct invasion of the land. I have to agree with that almost 100%. With U.S.-Iran ceasefire set to expire this Wednesday, the shift from words to first moves could happen rapidly if negotiations in Islamabad fail. And that's where we have the man and his friends. Now, again, going back to the Jerusalem Post, Turkey has now warned that any attack on Lebanon or Iran will now be considered an attack on Turkey. We just don't get much closer than what we're seeing right now. This generation may end up seeing a lot more. And so if that's the trigger, if that's the hook in the jaw, is that Israel continues its bombing campaign against Lebanon, then the risk is Israel has vowed, and this is, again, the peace deal ends April 26th. Israel has vowed to resume operations with great force April 26th if the Lebanese government does not take practical action to dismantle Hezbollah, who again, Iranian special forces. Analysts suggest this is the moment. Turkey is poised to act if it believes the ceasefire is being used to mask an Israeli annexation of southern Lebanese territory. Again, we're at the gates. And if we look at how the U.S. could weigh into this, it would be probably one of the most critical factors. It says the broker rule, the Trump administration is currently trying to balance a bilateral track with Turkey, including talks of re-entering the F-35 program against its long-standing defense of Israel. In using military deterrence, an analyst suggests that in the event, and this is something we may see very quickly, of an escalation, the U.S. Navy might deploy to the eastern Mediterranean to ensure calm, similar to the strategies used in previous Arab-Israeli conflicts. That may help. It may become a trap. We don't know yet, because when you deal with You're getting a lot of armies involved, and a couple of those are very powerful. And so, again, you could be a trap. And guys, all the pieces are being put into place. We talk about in Ezekiel the many peoples that will join GOG, which is Turkey. It says the leaders joined by a massive coalition including Persia, which is Iran, Kush, Sudan, and put Libya, and again, Turkey already has the control of Libya. All regions where Turkey has been building serious military and political influence lately. Guys, under the cover of darkness, behind the scenes, all of this is being planned for one thing: to bring in the New World Order, order out of chaos, and the Luciferian agenda, all at one time. And going back to Ezekiel just a moment, it talks about the many peoples that join GOG, which is Turkey, but it includes Persia, which is Iran, Kush, which is Sudan, and Put, which is Libya, which Turkey controls. Now, all of these regions are where Turkey has been building serious military and political influence lately. The prophecy explicitly mentions that other nations, the merchants of Tarshish, and their young lions only offer a toothless verbal protest. Have you come to take the spoil? As they bow out of the way. And that, look at the strength of Germany and the UK. That's about all they can do. But when you see that happen, we don't know how much time will be involved between the start and the end of that conflict, but because of European weakness, then they could see some very large problems increase far beyond what they think they have now because of it. Now, coming up this Wednesday, April 22nd, which is also the day that we're going to get to see Comet Pan-STARRS on LASCO C3. It's not going to be close to the sun, but it's supposed to be a very large and beautiful comet. Anyway, on that day is the deadline for the U.S.-Iranian ceasefire, and it's widely viewed as a major inflection point. With the 14-day truce nearly up, both sides are using the final hours to position themselves for either a historic Islamabad declaration or a return to all-out war. Now you got this, again, Islamabad declaration, or as it was called in the beginning, the Islamabad Accord. Same person sitting there back when the Abrahamic Accord was signed. Now Trump has already accused, I think it was early this morning, that Iran, he's accused them of a total violation of the ceasefire after the Iranian gunboats reportedly fired on a French and British commercial vessels in the Strait on Saturday. Those were the two that were told it was cool, you could go through, and then the gunboats hit them. But I can see a meme coming from Trump pointing at Starmer and Macron saying, I told you to help, but you were too weak. And that's the point about Europe's going to be in trouble, guys, because once the Sunni group comes into full power, they already have people all over Europe, right? It's not going to be much, and you already have the institution in place all across Europe that they want. So it won't be long. Europe will be the ones getting on boats and rowing somewhere else. Now, again, what we got tomorrow night, Kushner, the special envoy with Steve Witkoff, is to land in Islamabad to lead the Tuesday round of the Iran peace talks. While some former diplomats criticize his lack of experience, and there are many, the president has reiterated that Kushner is a central deal maker in the administration's effort to end the war before the Wednesday deadline. What's ironic is that I don't think he's ever stopped a war, but pretends to. But what's actually happening behind the scenes, behind the closed doors, what do we know about the peace talks? What's really happening? We know there's business deals, but what are the other things happening there? And all you got to do is put two and two together and see where we're at, guys. This is, again, the power has been handed off to this group. They are making the deals of the world between war, economics, politics. They are the group in charge. And so, again, Kushner can't be pulled in on anything that Congress has anything to do with. He's not being paid by them. He has not been elected. He's working as an individual separate from all of that. And why? Trump has kept him in the background much more during this administration than the first one. Something's not quite right with it, guys, but there's a lot of things pointing to a certain end that's been prophesized. And we see it happening as we speak. And I'm going to be watching for updates, guys, on this. Next couple of days will be critical. If the peace deal holds up for 2 more days with Iran and between us and Iran, that could break at any moment. And when that happens, will that be the section of dam that breaks and lets all the water out of the entire Middle East war? We're close. We're going to find out. No man knows. But we sure know the signs. Guys, it's a heads up. Be safe.